Welcome back. In our last lesson, we looked at how growing local populations traditionally pushed farmers to clear forests to make room for food crops. That is a very old story. But when colonial rule began, population pressure took a back seat. The British Empire introduced two entirely new, heavy industrial forces to the landscape, and they accelerated deforestation at a scale nobody had ever seen before. Those two forces were the rapid expansion of the railway network and the rise of commercial plantations. Both of these industrial forces did the exact same thing to the environment. They erased the diverse, beautiful chaos of the natural jungle and replaced it with strict, predictable, and highly profitable geometric lines. To understand why the British colonial government needed to build railways so frantically across India, we have to look at their primary goals. They needed to move imperial troops quickly across vast distances to maintain control, and they needed an efficient way to transport extracted raw materials back to their coastal ports for shipping. But you cannot just lay steel rails on bare dirt. You need sleepers. Sleepers are the heavy, rectangular wooden planks laid horizontally underneath the tracks. They hold the steel rails securely together in the correct position, and they absorb the massive, vibrating weight of a steam locomotive. Let's do the math on exactly what that requires. Every single mile of railway track required between 1,760 and 2,000 individual wooden sleepers. That means hundreds of straight, mature trees had to be cut down just to build a single mile of track. Now, scale that up. By the year 1890, the British had laid over 25,500 kilometers of track across the Indian subcontinent. The demand for timber became an insatiable mathematical equation. The government didn't chop all this wood themselves. They handed out logging contracts to private individuals. Because these contractors were paid to hit massive quotas, they simply went into the forests alongside the planned railway routes and clear-cut the trees indiscriminately. The railway system operated as a hungry industrial engine, literally consuming the forests it drove through to sustain its own existence. While the railways were eating through the landscape for infrastructure, the second major driver of deforestation was taking over the land for agriculture, commercial plantations. A plantation is a massive, large-scale farm that is strictly dedicated to growing one single commercial cash crop, rather than the diverse mix of food you would find on a traditional farm. In the 19th century, the growing urban populations and factories in Europe were hungry for specific commodities. They needed huge quantities of tea, coffee, and rubber. To meet this overseas demand, the colonial government claimed ownership over vast tracts of natural forest. They enclosed these areas and sold them off to European planters at incredibly cheap rates. Before you can plant thousands of acres of tea, you have to get rid of the forest that is already there. These enormous tracts of land were entirely stripped of their natural, dense vegetation, leaving behind a scarred, empty landscape ready for planting. Think about the biology of what was lost. A natural forest patch in places like the Western Ghats can easily hold 500 different interdependent plant and animal species. A plantation forcefully reduces that entire complex ecosystem down to a single, uniform crop planted in straight lines. Chopping down a forest to plant tea is the total eradication of a biodiverse environment, all to maximize the economic output of one single export. So, when we look back at the rapid deforestation of India during colonial rule, we see a landscape heavily modified to serve the specific economic priorities of an overseas empire. Private contractors clear-cut ancient woodlands to supply millions of wooden sleepers for the expanding railways, while European planters wiped out whole ecosystems to establish massive single-crop farms. And it is vital to remember that these forests were not empty spaces. Imposing this profitable geometry displaced countless local and indigenous communities who relied entirely on the natural variety of the jungle for their food, medicine, and livelihoods. This leaves us with a difficult question. Does building modern infrastructure and expanding agriculture always require the complete sacrifice of nature and its people? As we look at modern economic development happening around the world today, we have to ask ourselves, who gets to profit from the geometric lines, and who is forced to suffer the loss of the jungle? Think about that, and we'll pick this up in our next class.